My son kicked me out of his wedding for looking poor, but his mother-in-law recognized me. I remember the day the invitation arrived, a cream-colored envelope with gold embossing that seemed to mock my modest mailbox. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing the elegant card inside. Together with their families, Michael Robert Thompson and Vanessa Claire Bennett request the honor of your presence. My son was getting married. My Michael, the little boy I had raised alone after his father abandoned us when he was just 3 years old. The invitation felt heavy in my hands, much heavier than paper should. It had been almost 2 years since we'd spoken. 2 years of silence after our argument about his fiancée and the new life he was building. A life that seemed to have no room for his old mom from the wrong side of Boston. I'm Martha Thompson, 63 years old, and I've worked as a hospital custodian for over 30 years. Not glamorous work, but honest work that put food on our table and eventually helped Michael through his first years of college before he earned that scholarship. I've never had much, but everything I did have, I gave to my son. Black tie optional. The invitation read. I almost laughed. There was nothing optional about it if you knew the Bennetts. I'd never met them personally, but I'd heard enough from Michael during our last conversations. Old money, summer homes in the Hamptons, private school connections. The kind of people who would look at my weathered hands and Walmart clothes and know immediately I didn't belong. My tiny apartment in Dorchester felt especially small that evening. The walls, lined with photos of Michael growing up, his first day of school, high school graduation, college acceptance letter in hand, all seemed to stare back at me. His smile in those photos, so genuine and full of hope, had changed in recent years. In the few pictures he'd sent before our estrangement, his smile had become polished, practiced, like something he'd learned in his business classes rather than the joyful expression I'd known. I picked up my favorite photo, Michael at his high school graduation, beaming with pride as he held his diploma. I had worked double shifts for months to buy him the suit he wore that day. It wasn't expensive, but it was new and fit him perfectly. He looked so handsome, so full of promise. Where did we lose each other, Michael? I whispered to the smiling face in the frame. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, the invitation on my nightstand seeming to glow in the darkness. Should I go? Would I be welcome? Or would I just be an embarrassment to my son, a reminder of the humble beginnings he'd worked so hard to leave behind? Morning found me exhausted, but determined to discuss it with someone who would understand. My friend Diane has been my rock for decades. We met on my first day at Boston Memorial Hospital, both of us newly hired custodians with young children, and bills to pay. Her son Daniel and my Michael even played together as boys, though they drifted apart as teenagers when Daniel started working after high school while Michael headed to college. Should I even go? I asked Diane over coffee at our usual diner the next day. We'd worked together for 20 years, cleaning hospital rooms side by side through night shifts and holiday weekends. Of course you should go, Diane said firmly, her gray hair pulled back in her usual practical bun. He's your son, Martha, your only child. But what would I wear? How would I fit in with those people? My voice cracked. Michael hasn't even introduced me to Vanessa. What if he's ashamed of me? Diane reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then that's his problem, not yours. You raised that boy right, Martha. You sacrificed everything for him. If he can't see your worth beyond your bank account, then he needs a reminder of where he came from. I don't want to ruin his day, I admitted, voicing my deepest fear. What if I show up and he's embarrassed? What if his new in-laws look down on me? Let me ask you something, Diane said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. If the situation were reversed, if Michael had stayed a janitor like us, and you had somehow become wealthy and moved in fancy circles, would you ever be ashamed to call him your son? Never, I answered without hesitation. I'd be proud of him no matter what. He did for a living, exactly, Diane nodded. That's what real love looks like. That's what family means. And if Michael has forgotten that, then maybe he needs his mother there to remind him. Her words stayed with me as I returned to my apartment. The invitation sat on my kitchen table, catching the afternoon sunlight. I ran my fingers over the raised lettering, tracing my son's name. Michael Robert Thompson. Named Robert after my father, a factory worker who had taught me the value of hard work and dignity. What would Dad think of Michael now, of the choices he was making? I spent the next month saving every penny I could. I picked up extra shifts, skipped my weekly movie night, and even cut back on heating in my apartment despite the Boston winter chill that crept through my old windows. By the time the wedding was 3 weeks away, I had saved enough to buy a modest but decent dress from a department store sale rack and a bus ticket to Connecticut, where the wedding would be held at the Bennett family estate. Every night after my shift, I'd come home and work on my gift for the newlyweds. I had decided to make them a quilt, not just any quilt, but one pieced together from fabrics that told the story of Michael's life. I'd been saving scraps for years, a piece of his baby blanket, part of the shirt he wore on his first day of school, a square from the bedspread he'd had as a teenager, even a bit of his high school graduation gown. Each piece represented a milestone, a memory, a moment we had shared together. As I stitched by the light of my old lamp, I thought about what this quilt represented. It wasn't just a gift. It was our history together, the physical embodiment of all the love and sacrifice that had gone into raising him. Would he see that? Would he understand what I was trying to say with each carefully chosen piece and every tiny stitch? The night before I left, I carefully packed my small suitcase. I wrapped my gift in simple brown paper, not having the money for fancy wrapping, but tied it with a blue ribbon I'd saved from a birthday present years ago. He might not appreciate it now, I whispered to myself as I placed it in my bag. But someday, he'll understand what it means. Sleep eluded me again. That night, I kept imagining the moment I would see Michael again after 2 years. Would he hug me? Would he be happy to see me? Or would there be that flicker of disappointment in his eyes, the one I'd started noticing in the years before our estrangement, when he'd come home from college with new friends and new ideas about what his life should look like? Morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. I dressed in my traveling clothes, simple, practical, clean, and took one last look around my apartment before heading out. The bus to Connecticut was scheduled for 9 a.m., and I was determined not to be late. The bus ride was long and uncomfortable. My arthritis flared up about halfway through the journey, making my fingers swell and ache. The pain was familiar, though. I'd worked through worse at the hospital, pushing mops and lifting trash bags while joint pain radiated up my arms. I took a single pain pill, rationing my small supply for the weekend ahead. Looking out the window as the scenery changed from urban Boston to the affluent suburbs of Connecticut, I couldn't help thinking about how far Michael had come from our humble beginnings. Or perhaps more accurately, how far he had gone from me. The distance wasn't just measured in miles, but in life experiences, in opportunities, in the growing gulf between my world and his. By the time the bus pulled into the station in the small Connecticut town near the Bennett estate, my nerves were frayed and my confidence was waning. I found a public restroom where I could freshen up and change into slightly nicer clothes before taking a taxi to the estate. As I looked at myself in the spotted mirror, I saw a woman who had aged before her time, with work-worn hands and tired eyes, but also a woman who had done her best, who had loved fiercely and sacrificed willingly. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," I told my reflection firmly. The taxi driver was chatty as we drove through the town, pointing out local landmarks and asking about my visit. I told him I was attending a wedding, but I couldn't bring myself to say it was my son's. Something held me back, perhaps a premonition of what was to come. The Bennett estate was exactly as imposing as I'd imagined. The taxi driver who picked me up from the bus station whistled low as we approached the wrought iron gates. "Fancy wedding, huh?" he asked, eyeing my simple attire in the rearview mirror. My son, I said with a small smile. He's done very well. For himself. Good for him, the driver replied, but there was something in his tone that made me wonder if he was thinking what I was, that perhaps Michael had done too well, risen too far above his roots. The driveway seemed endless, winding, through manicured gardens and past a fountain before finally stopping at the grand entrance. I paid the driver, wincing a little at the cost, and stood for a moment in front of the mansion, clutching my small suitcase and the gift box to my chest like shields. Wedding guests were already arriving, stepping out of luxury cars in designer clothes, air-kissing each other's cheeks, and laughing with practiced elegance. I stood frozen, suddenly aware of my discount store dress and sensible shoes that I'd polished meticulously the night before. Can I help you? A young man in a uniform approached me, his expression polite but distant. I'm here for the Thompson Bennett wedding, I said, straightening my shoulders. I'm Michael's mother. Something flickered across the young man's face, surprise, perhaps, or discomfort. I couldn't quite tell, but it made my stomach clench with apprehension. Of course, he said after a brief hesitation. The rehearsal dinner is about to begin in the garden pavilion. If you'll follow me? I followed him through the mansion, each step taking me deeper into a world that seemed designed to make me feel out of place. The floors were marble, cool and gleaming beneath my feet. The walls were adorned with artwork that probably cost more than I earned in several years. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, casting rainbow prisms across the space. This place is like a museum, I murmured, more to myself than to my guide. The main house dates back to 1902, he replied without turning around. The Bennett family has maintained the original architecture while modernizing the amenities. Through the windows, I could see the garden pavilion, strung with twinkling lights and filled with beautiful people holding champagne flutes. Laughter drifted in through the open doors, along with the gentle notes of a string quartet. And there, in the center of it all, was my son. Michael stood tall and handsome in an expensive suit, his arm around a beautiful young woman who could only be Vanessa. They were surrounded by people who looked just like them, young, successful, polished. People who had never known what it was like to count pennies for grocery money or work double shifts on Christmas. Michael glanced up as I approached the pavilion entrance. For a split second, I saw recognition in his eyes, followed immediately by something that shattered my heart. Panic. He excused himself from his group and hurried toward me, his expression a mixture of surprise and dismay. "Mom?" he said, his voice low and urgent as he reached me. "What are you doing here now? The wedding isn't until tomorrow." The invitation said there was a rehearsal dinner today, I explained, suddenly uncertain. I fumbled in my purse for the invitation, needing to confirm I hadn't made a mistake. I thought family would be welcome. Yes, but I didn't think you'd come to this part. We didn't discuss it. His eyes darted around, checking to see if anyone was watching our exchange. We haven't discussed anything in 2 years, Michael, I said quietly, hurt blooming in my chest at his obvious discomfort with my presence. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from his childhood. "Look, Mom, it's complicated. We have a lot of important people here tonight. Vanessa's father's business associates, potential clients, and I don't fit in with them," I finished for him, my voice steady despite the pain lancing through my heart. "Is that what you're trying to say?" Michael had the decency to look ashamed, but he didn't deny it. "That's not exactly what I meant. It's just that this weekend is important for my future, for my career." "And I might jeopardize that?" I asked, clutching my gift a little tighter. "Because of what I do for a living? Because of how I dress?" Before he could respond, a woman approached us, elegant, slender, with Vanessa's same delicate features but aged by time and experience. Mrs. Bennett, I presumed, Michael's future mother-in-law. "Michael, darling, aren't you going to introduce us?" she asked, her voice cultured and smooth. Her eyes, a striking blue that matched her designer dress, assessed me with polite curiosity. Michael's face went pale. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the terrible calculation happening behind them. In that moment, I knew what he was going to do before he did it. I could feel it coming, like the heaviness in the air before a storm breaks. "This is—" He hesitated. Then something in him seemed to break. "This is one of the hospital administrators. Where I volunteered in college, she was just dropping off a gift. The world seemed to stop. The garden, the lights, the elegant people, everything froze as those words hung in the air between us. My son, my only child, the boy I had raised alone, had just denied me, erased our entire history with a single sentence. I couldn't breathe. The gift in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Each lovingly stitched square of that quilt represented a moment in our shared life, a life he had just pretended didn't exist. Mrs. Bennet looked at me curiously, her eyes taking in my simple dress, my worn hands, the small gift box I still clutched. Something passed across her face. Not disgust or dismissal as I might have expected, but something more complex. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "How thoughtful of you to come all this way," she said, her eyes never leaving my face. "Perhaps you'd like to stay for a drink before you go?" There was something in her tone, a warmth that didn't match the cool elegance of her appearance. For a moment, I was tempted to accept, if only to see how Michael would react. But the pain of his rejection was too fresh, too raw. Before I could answer, Michael interjected. "Actually, she can't stay. She just wanted to drop this off before heading back to Boston." He took the gift box from my hands, not meeting my eyes. "Thank you for coming. I'll have someone call you a taxi." And just like that, I was dismissed. Erased from my own son's wedding before it had even begun. As I turned to leave, tears blurring my vision, I heard Mrs. Bennet say something to Michael in a low, questioning tone. I didn't stay to hear his response. The same uniformed staff member escorted me back through the mansion. This time, I didn't notice the artwork or the expensive furnishings. All I could see was the look in my son's eyes when he'd pretended not to know me. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the young man asked as we reached the entrance. There must have been something in my expression that concerned him, a crack in the composure I was trying desperately to maintain. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired from the journey." Outside, waiting for the taxi Michael had ordered, I finally let the tears fall. 30 years of sacrifices, of working nights so I could be there for him during the day, of skipping meals so he could have new school supplies, of wearing the same winter coat for a decade so he could have a proper graduation gift, all of. It erased in a moment of shame. The taxi arrived and the driver, different from the one who had brought me, gave me a sympathetic look as I climbed in with my small suitcase. "Rough day?" he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You could say that," I managed, giving him the address of the small motel where I'd booked a room for the night. "Not staying at the big house?" he asked, nodding back toward the Bennet estate as we pulled away. "No," I said simply. "I don't belong there." His expression hardened. "I can't do this right now. The ceremony is about to start. Please, just go. We can talk another time." "There won't be another time, will there?" I asked softly. "Once you say your vows today, you'll be part of their world completely, and that world doesn't have room for someone like me." Before he could answer, another voice joined our conversation. Familiar, though I'd only heard it briefly the night before. "Is everything all right here?" Mrs. Bennet approached, elegant in a pale blue dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. Her eyes moved between Michael and me, assessing, calculating. "Everything's fine, Claire," Michael said, quickly composing himself. Just a small misunderstanding about seating arrangements. Mrs. Bennet, Claire, looked at me more closely, her head tilting slightly. You're the woman from the hospital who came last night, aren't you? I met her gaze directly, drawing on every ounce of dignity I possessed. I'm Martha Thompson, Michael's mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face drained of color. Claire Bennet's eyes widened, then narrowed as she turned. To look at my son. His mother? She repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. Michael told us his mother passed away when he was in college. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. I'd known Michael was ashamed of me, had felt it in his gradual withdrawal over the years as he climbed the social ladder. But to have told his new family I was dead? That was a cruelty I hadn't imagined possible. I stared at my son, waiting for him to deny it, to say there had been some misunderstanding. But the guilt in his eyes confirmed the truth of Claire's words. He had erased me not just from his present life, but from his entire narrative, replacing me with a more convenient fiction. I can explain, Michael began, but Claire held up a hand. Stopping him. Not to me, she said sharply. I'm not the one you've lied to or about. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Thompson, would you walk with me for a moment? Stunned, I nodded, following her away from the seating area and toward a small garden path that led away from the wedding setup. Michael started to follow, but Claire stopped him with a look. Your bride needs you, Michael. I believe she's having some last-minute nerves. We'll return shortly. As we walked away, I glanced back to see Michael standing alone, looking lost and uncertain. For the first time since I'd arrived, the confident, polished young executive was gone, replaced by a young man facing the consequences of his choices. We walked in silence for a few moments, moving deeper into the garden where the sounds of the gathering wedding guests faded. The sea path wound through meticulously maintained flower beds, past a small fountain, and finally to a secluded bench beneath a flowering tree. When Claire finally spoke, her voice was measured, careful. I owe you an apology, Mrs. Thompson. Of all the things I had expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. I don't understand. When Michael began dating my daughter, he told us his background was different from what it apparently is, she explained, smoothing her dress as she sat on the bench and gestured for me to join her. He spoke of growing up in Beacon Hill, of his mother, you, being a hospital administrator who died of cancer while he was in college. He mentioned an estranged father who had remarried and moved to Europe. Each word was another blow. My son hadn't just denied me. He had created an entirely fictional mother to replace me, one more suitable for the narrative he wanted to present. I never lived in Beacon Hill, I said quietly, my hands twisting in my lap. We had a small apartment in Dorchester, and I've never been an administrator. I'm a custodian. I clean the hospital rooms, not manage them. And your health? Claire asked gently. Michael spoke of a long battle with cancer. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me despite myself. The only thing I've battled is arthritis from years of scrubbing floors. I'm very much alive, as you can see. Claire nodded slowly. I suspected something wasn't right when I saw you last night. Your hands... She glanced down at my weathered hands, and I resisted the urge to hide them. They're the hands of someone who has worked hard their entire life. Not the manicured hands of the woman Michael described. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to defend my son, to explain away his lies as the desperate actions of a young man trying to belong in a world that valued pedigree over character. But a larger part of me was still reeling from the depth of his deception. I don't understand why he would do this, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Was he so ashamed of me that he had to pretend I was dead? Claire was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the manicured gardens. When she spoke again, her voice held a warmth that surprised me. My husband comes from old money, Martha. His family has been wealthy for generations. But me? She gave a small, ironic smile. I grew up in a trailer park in New Jersey. My father was a mechanic. My mother waited tables at a diner. I worked my way through state college on scholarships and part-time jobs. I stared at her, unable to reconcile this history with the elegant, polished woman beside me. How? I met William at a fundraiser where I was working as a server, she explained, a fondness creeping into her voice at the memory. He asked me out. I said no 3 times before finally agreeing. His family was horrified. They had society girls lined up for him. But William didn't care about my background. He cared about me. She turned to face me fully. I understand what it's like to be judged for where you come from rather than who you are. What I don't understand, what I cannot accept, is my future son-in-law lying about his mother, erasing you to make himself seem more acceptable. Her words sank in slowly, bringing with them a strange sense of relief. Here was someone who understood, who had walked a similar path. Does everyone know, I asked, about where you came from? Claire's laugh was genuine. Oh yes, I made sure of that. William's mother nearly had a heart attack when I mentioned my father's auto shop at our first dinner together. But I refused to be ashamed of my parents or my upbringing. They worked hard to give me opportunities, just as you did for Michael. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Claire had embraced her background, while Michael had chosen to bury his, and me along with it. What happens now? I asked, dreading the answer. Will you tell Vanessa? Will the wedding be called off? Claire considered this, her expression thoughtful. Vanessa deserves to know the truth about the man she's marrying. But that's a conversation for Michael to have with her, not me. She paused, then added more gently. As for the wedding, that will depend on how Michael handles this situation, on whether he can recognize the mistake he's made and make amends. The wedding music had started, floating across the garden toward us. Claire stood, straightening her dress. The ceremony will be beginning soon. I think it's time we return, don't you? I remained seated, confusion washing over me. But Michael doesn't want me there. He made that very clear. Michael, Claire said firmly, needs to understand that family, real family, is not something to be ashamed of or hidden away. My daughter deserves to know the truth about the man she's marrying, and Michael needs to recognize the pain he's caused you. She extended her hand to me. Come, Martha. Take your rightful place at your son's wedding. Claire was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the manicured gardens. When she spoke again, her voice held a warmth that surprised me. My husband comes from old money, Martha. His family has been wealthy for generations. But me? She gave a small, ironic smile. I grew up in a trailer park in New Jersey. My father was a mechanic. My mother waited tables at a diner. I worked my way through state college on scholarships and part-time jobs. I stared at her, unable to reconcile this history with the elegant, polished woman beside me. How? I met William at a fundraiser where I was working as a server, she explained, a fondness creeping into her voice at the memory. He asked me out. I said no 3 times before finally agreeing. His family was horrified. They had society girls lined up for him. But William didn't care about my background. He cared about me. She turned to face me fully. I understand what it's like to be judged for where you come from rather than who you are. What I don't understand, what I cannot accept, is my future son-in-law lying about his mother, erasing you to make himself seem more acceptable. Her words sank in slowly, bringing with them a strange sense of relief. Here was someone who understood, who had walked a similar path. Does everyone know, I asked, about where you came from? Claire's laugh was genuine. Oh yes, I made sure of that. William's mother nearly had a heart attack when I mentioned my father's auto shop at our first dinner together. But I refused to be ashamed of my parents or my upbringing. They worked hard to give me opportunities, just as you did for Michael. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Claire had embraced her background, while Michael had chosen to bury his, and me along with it. What happens now? I asked, dreading the answer. Will you tell Vanessa? Will the wedding be called off? The motel was modest but clean, the kind of place that catered to traveling salespeople and tourists on tight budgets. The receptionist barely looked up from her magazine as she handed me the key to my room. In a way, her indifference was a relief, after the scrutiny I'd felt at the estate. The room was small and outdated, with a sagging double bed and a bathroom where the light flickered intermittently. But it had hot water and clean towels, and at that moment, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could fall apart in private, away from judging eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body suddenly heavy with exhaustion and grief. I thought about the quilt I'd made, now in Michael's hands. Would he even open it? Or would he discard it, ashamed of the homemade gift from the mother he didn't want to acknowledge? The tears came again, hot and relentless. I cried for the little boy who used to run into my arms after school, for the teenager who had been so proud to help me fix our leaky sink, for the young man who had hugged me tightly on his first day of college and promised he'd make me proud. I cried for all the versions of my son I had known and loved, and for the stranger he had become. When the tears finally subsided, I was left with a hollow feeling in my chest and a pounding headache. I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the tears and soothe my aching joints. Then I called Diane. He denied me, I said when she answered, my voice hoarse from crying. He told them I was just someone from the hospital where he volunteered. He took my gift and had me sent away in a taxi. Diane's outrage on my behalf was both comforting and painful to hear. That ungrateful, pretentious little, she began, then stopped herself. I'm sorry, Martha. I can't imagine how much that must have hurt you. What do I do now? I asked, feeling lost. Should I just go home tomorrow? Forget about the wedding? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What does your heart tell you to do? Diane finally asked. I closed my eyes, trying to listen to the quiet voice beneath the hurt and anger. He's still my son, I whispered. No matter what he's done, no matter how much he's changed, he's still my son. Then you already know the answer, Diane said gently. Get some rest, Martha. Tomorrow's going to be a difficult day, but you're stronger than you think. After we hung up, I unpacked my small suitcase, hanging up the navy blue dress I'd bought for the wedding itself. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I'd purchased in years, chosen carefully for the occasion. Looking at it now, I wondered if I was foolish to even consider attending the ceremony after what had happened. I barely slept that night in the small motel room. The bed was uncomfortable, but it wasn't the sagging mattress that kept me awake. It was the hollow feeling in my chest, the echo of Michael's words playing over and over in my mind. One of the hospital administrators. Not my mother. Not the woman who raised me. Just a casual acquaintance. Someone easily dismissed and forgotten. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through thin curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the spotted mirror across the room. My face looked older than it had just yesterday, new lines etched around my mouth and eyes. I had packed my best outfit for the wedding itself, a navy blue dress I'd found, on clearance and carefully altered to fit my frame. It hung now on the bathroom door, pressed and ready, mocking me with its presence. You're not going, I told my reflection firmly. You can't go where you're not wanted. But even as I said the words, I knew I couldn't stay away. Whatever Michael had become, whatever choices he was making, he was still my son. The baby I had held through countless fevers, the boy whose nightmares I had soothed, the teenager whose heartbreaks I had comforted. I couldn't abandon him on his wedding day, even if he had already abandoned me. I took my time getting ready, smoothing lotion over my work-roughened hands, applying the small amount of makeup I owned with careful precision. I styled my graying. Hair the best I could, pinning it up in a simple but elegant arrangement that Diane had taught me for special occasions. As I slipped on the navy blue dress, I checked my reflection one more time. The woman looking back at me wasn't glamorous or sophisticated, but she had dignity. A quiet strength that came from years of facing hardship without breaking. Today, I would need every ounce of that strength. "You can do this, Martha," I told myself, straightening my shoulders. "You faced worse than rich people looking down their noses at you." The taxi ride to the Bennett estate felt both too long and too short. My stomach churned with anxiety as we approached those same wrought iron gates, now decorated with white. Ribbons and flowers for the wedding. The driver, yet another new one, whistled appreciatively. "Fancy place," he commented. "Wedding guest?" "Mother of the groom," I replied, deciding in that moment that I would no longer hide or diminish who I was. Michael might be ashamed of me, but I was not ashamed of myself. The driver's eyebrows rose slightly. "Big day for you, then. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said, wishing the warm feeling his words should have brought didn't feel so hollow. The grounds were transformed from the previous evening. White chairs were arranged in perfect rows on the vast lawn, facing an elegant white arch covered in flowers. A red carpet ran down the center aisle, scattered with rose petals. It was like something from a magazine, beautiful and perfect in every detail. I paid the taxi driver and stood for a moment, gathering my courage. Guests were already arriving, being escorted to their seats by young men in formal attire. Everyone was dressed impeccably, women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits, many wearing hats or fascinator headpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I forced myself to walk forward, head held high despite the curious or dismissive glances cast my way. Several people looked me over, clearly trying to place me to determine which side of the wedding party I belonged to. I ignored their stares, focusing instead on finding a place for myself. Finally, I approached. One of the ushers, a young man with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Excuse me," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm Michael Thompson's mother. Where should I sit?" The usher's smile faltered. He glanced down at his list, then back up at me with growing discomfort. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't have you on my list for the family section." "Check again," I insisted, my heart beginning to pound. "Martha Thompson, I'm the groom's mother." He scanned his list once more, his discomfort evident. "I'm very sorry, but you're not on my list at all. Perhaps there's been a mistake?" It wasn't a mistake. I knew that even before I saw Michael approaching us, his face set in a grim expression. He was handsome in his tuxedo, looking every inch the successful young businessman marrying into an even more successful family. But I could still see traces of the little boy who used to run to me with skinned knees and treasured rocks found on the playground. "Mom," he said quietly, taking my elbow and guiding me away from the seating area. "I thought I made it clear yesterday that this isn't a good time." "You made it clear that you're ashamed of me," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the pain lancing through my heart. "But I'm still your mother, Michael. I have every right to be at your wedding." He glanced around nervously, checking to see if anyone was watching our exchange. "It's not that simple. Vanessa's family, they have expectations. This wedding is important for my career, for our future. And I don't fit into that future?" I asked, the words bitter on my tongue. "Because I clean hospital rooms instead of owning them? Because my hands are rough from work instead of smooth from privilege?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my throat tighten. "You don't understand the world I'm in now, Mom. Everything is different here. The connections, the relationships, it all matters. And I don't." "Matter?" My voice finally broke on the question. For a moment, Michael's carefully constructed facade cracked, and I saw a flicker of the son I knew. Pain and guilt crossed his face, quickly replaced by determination. Of course you matter. But there's more at stake here than you realize. What could possibly be at stake that would make you deny your own mother? I asked, genuinely bewildered by his reasoning. What kind of people would think less of you for having a mother who worked hard her whole life to give you opportunities? It's not that simple, he repeated, frustration edging into his voice. My relationship with the Bennetts, my position at the firm, it's all connected. I can't risk jeopardizing everything I've worked for. Everything you've worked for? I echoed, disbelief and anger rising within me. And what about everything I worked for? The double shifts, the nights without heat so you could have new school clothes, the years of putting your needs before my own? Does none of that matter now that you've moved up in the world? Claire considered this, her expression thoughtful. Vanessa deserves to know the truth about the man she's marrying, but that's a conversation for Michael to have with her, not me. She paused, then added more gently, as for the wedding, that will depend on how Michael handles this situation. On whether he can recognize the mistake he's made and make amends. The wedding music had started, floating across the garden toward us. Claire stood, straightening her dress. The ceremony will be beginning soon. I think it's time we returned. Don't you? I remained seated, confusion washing over me. But Michael doesn't want me there. He made that very clear. Michael, Claire said firmly, needs to understand that family, real family, is not something to be ashamed of or hidden away. My daughter deserves to know the truth about the man she's marrying, and Michael needs to recognize the pain he's caused you. She extended her hand to me. Come, Martha, take your rightful place at your son's wedding. I hesitated, then placed my rough hand in her smooth one, allowing her to help me to my feet. Together, we walked back toward the wedding, two mothers, from different worlds, bound by concern for our children and the future they were creating together. As we approached the seating area, the music changed, signaling the start of the processional. Guests were all seated now, turning in their chairs to watch as the bridal party began their walk down the aisle. I expected Claire to lead me to a back row, somewhere unobtrusive, but instead she guided me directly to the front, to the reserved family section. Claire, I whispered urgently, my heart racing. I can't sit here. Michael will have to face the truth, she interrupted quietly. And so will my family. With gentle pressure, she guided me into a seat in the front row, then took her own place across the aisle. I sat rigidly, acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers from those around me. A distinguished older woman beside me, William's mother, I would later learn, gave me a cool, assessing look before leaning toward her companion to murmur something I couldn't hear. The ceremony continued, the bridesmaids walking down the aisle in flowing dresses the color of champagne. Then came Vanessa, radiant in white, escorted by a distinguished-looking man who could only be William Bennett. They passed where I sat, and for a brief moment William's eyes met mine, confusion evident in his expression as he glanced between me and his wife across the aisle, and then I saw Michael standing at the altar, his eyes widening in panic as he spotted me in the front row. For a terrible moment, I thought he might actually stop the wedding, might create a scene rather than acknowledge my presence. But then Vanessa reached him, her face glowing with happiness, and whatever battle was raging within my son seemed to subside. He took her hands, smiling down at her with genuine affection. The ceremony was beautiful, the vows heartfelt. Despite everything, tears filled my eyes as I watched my son pledge his life to this young woman. Whatever lies he had told, whatever pain he had caused, I couldn't help but feel proud of the man standing before us all, accomplished, articulate, committed. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the guests erupted in applause. As Michael and Vanessa turned to face their friends and family for the first time as a married couple, Michael's eyes met mine. In that unguarded moment, I saw a complex mixture of emotions cross his face: shame, regret, fear, and something else. Something that looked, just possibly, like the beginning of remorse. The newlyweds proceeded back up the aisle, followed by their wedding party. As guests began to rise for the recessional, Claire appeared at my side once more. "The reception is in the main ballroom," she said. "William and I would be honored if you would join us at the family table." I shook my head, overwhelmed by her kindness, but aware of the realities. "I appreciate that, Claire, but I think it would be best if I go. This is supposed to be a happy day for Michael and Vanessa. My presence is complicated." "Life is complicated," Claire replied simply. "Family is complicated, but that doesn't mean we hide from the complications." She took my hand again. "Please, Martha, stay. If not for Michael, then for me. I'd like very much to get to know my fellow mother-in-law." I looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of pity or condescension, but found only sincerity. Slowly, I nodded. "All right, I'll stay." The reception was held in a grand ballroom, with crystal chandeliers and elegant table settings. Claire led me to the head table, where she rearranged the place cards to create a space for me between herself and William's mother. The elderly woman regarded me with cool curiosity, but made no comment about my presence. Michael kept his distance during most of the reception, but Vanessa approached our table during a break in the dancing. "Mrs. Thompson," she said hesitantly, I'm very confused right now, but I wanted to say hello." "Hello, Vanessa," I replied gently. "You look beautiful. Congratulations on your marriage." She bit her lip, clearly struggling with what to say next. "Michael told me," he said. "I know what Michael told you," I said, "and we'll sort it all out. But today is your wedding day. It should be filled with joy, not complications." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, gratitude flickering across her face. "Thank you. I hope we'll have a chance to really meet soon, to start over." As the evening progressed, I spoke with William's mother, who asked direct questions about my life and Michael's upbringing. After hearing about the sacrifices I'd made as a single mother, she nodded slowly. "That must have been extremely difficult." "It was," I acknowledged, "but he was worth every sacrifice." She studied me for a long moment. "Yes, I believe he was. And I believe, Mrs. Thompson, that he owes you far more than he seems to realize." As the reception began to wind down, I decided it was time for me to leave. I said my goodbyes to Claire and William, exchanging phone numbers with a promise to stay in touch. I was waiting for the taxi Claire had called when Michael finally approached me. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" He led me to a small sitting room off the main hall. "I don't know what to say," he began. "I don't know how to explain what I've done." "You don't need to explain it to me," I replied. "I understand it perfectly. You wanted to belong in this world, and I was a reminder of where you came from. A world you wanted to forget." He flinched but didn't deny it. "It wasn't that simple." "It never is," I agreed. "But it also wasn't that complicated. You were ashamed of me, of our life together." Michael paced the room, agitation evident in every movement. "When I started at Bennett Financial, everyone came from money, from connections. Their parents were executives and doctors and lawyers. And there I was, scholarship kid from Dorchester, son of a—" He cut himself off. "Son of a cleaning lady," I finished for him. "That's who you are, Michael. That's who raised you, who loved you, who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities." "I know," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I know that. I've always known that. But it was easier to create a different story, to become someone else." "And now?" I asked. "Now that your new family knows the truth, what happens now?" He sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. I don't know. Claire says. She says I need to make this right. That Vanessa deserves the truth, that our marriage can't start with lies. She's right, I said simply. But what if... He looked up at me, suddenly looking very young again, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. What if Vanessa doesn't want me once she knows everything? What if her family withdraws their support? I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. Then you'll know that their love was conditional, that it was based on who they thought you were, not who you actually are. I paused. But I don't think that will happen. Claire isn't like that, and from what little I've seen of Vanessa, she isn't either. Michael was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, Mom, he finally said, his voice barely audible. I'm so sorry for what I did, for denying you, for erasing you. The tears I'd been holding back all day finally spilled over. I know you are, and I forgive you, Michael. I'll always forgive you. But this isn't about me. It's about you and the man you want to be. The sound of the taxi arriving interrupted our conversation. Michael hesitated, then embraced me. It was an awkward hug at first, but then his arms tightened around me, and I felt his shoulders shake with silent sobs. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I never stopped loving you. I lost my way. The next morning, Michael and Vanessa came to my motel before they left for their honeymoon. Vanessa hugged me warmly. Michael told me everything last night, she said. About your life together, about the lies he told. I'm so sorry for how you've been treated. It's not your fault, I assured her. Still, I want you to know that I'm grateful, she continued. The man I fell in love with, his work ethic, his determination, those qualities came from you, from the example you set. Michael stood beside her, looking both chastened and relieved. We want you to visit us when we get back, he said. Our home is your home, Mom. Always. Over the months that followed, we slowly rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't always easy. There were awkward moments, old hurts that resurfaced unexpectedly. But there was healing too, and growth. 6 months after the wedding, Michael stood at a podium at a charity event for Bennett Financial and told our story, the real story, of a single mother who worked as a hospital custodian to give her son opportunities she never had. He spoke of sacrifice and love and the true meaning of success. When their daughter was born a year later, a little girl they named Martha Claire, I finally retired from the hospital after 35 years. Now I spend my days helping care for my granddaughter, teaching her the value of hard work and treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their job or background. Claire and I have become unlikely friends, 2 women from different worlds united by our love for our children and grandchild. You know, she said to me recently, William's mother told me something interesting. She said that, in all her years in society, she's never met anyone with more natural dignity than you, Martha. I laughed at that. I'm not sure about dignity. But I do know who I am. I've always known. That's exactly what she meant, Claire replied with a smile. And that's what Michael finally understands now, too. Life isn't perfect. There are still moments when I feel out of place in Michael and Vanessa's world. But then I look at my granddaughter, who has her father's eyes and her grandmother's determination, and I'm reminded that love transcends social boundaries. My son once kicked me out of his wedding for looking poor. But in doing so, he set in motion events that would ultimately lead to something far richer than either of us could have.